Guys, Lord Zone here, and today I'm going to be ranking every Targaryen king. See, we have them all listed in order, and we'll start with King Aegon the First, the Conqueror. He was a great king. First of all, he conquered the Seven Kingdoms, all except Dorne. He was gracious to those who bent the knee and merciless to those who refused. He created the Small Council. He established the King's Peace, which forbids conflict in the realm without the crown's permission. His last two decades of his reign were so peaceful that they were called the Dragon's Peace. He created the Crown Lands and King's Landing, accepted the faith of the Seven to appease many of the great houses, built massive walls around King's Landing for defense. But he did have some flaws. His firstborn son and heir, Aenys, was not fit to be king, and he does deserve some blame for that. And neither was his second son, Maegor, but we'll get into that later. But all in all, he's definitely deserving of being an S tier king. Next up, we have Aenys the First, the firstborn son of King Aegon with his sister wife Rhaenys. He was not a good king. He was considered too weak to rule by many. 4 rebels rose against him in the first year of his reign, and he dealt with the rebels by sending messengers to them asking why they rebelled, which is not really how you should handle rebellion. The rebellions were eventually ended thanks to his brother and certain lords in the realm, but no thanks to Aenys himself. He named a septon hand of the king. His actions led to the Faith Militant Uprising, which was a major threat to ending the Targaryen dynasty, and had to be dealt with by his brother and his son. Aenys was not fit to be king, as many of the kings on this list are, as you'll see in the future. So Aenys, do I put him? I'm going to put him in D tier and then make an F tier category, because I don't feel like there's enough. Roll below. This will be reserved for 2 kings in particular. Okay. Now next up we have King Maegor the First, the Cruel. Maegor is a controversial king. Some people think he was really good, others think he was really bad. Let's just go through his reign. He claimed the throne despite his nephew being the rightful heir. He killed any who opposed his rule and decrees. He took 6 wives, which was seen as an abomination to many. He continued the construction of the Red Keep, having secret passages and dungeons built. He viciously but successfully fought against the Faith Militant Uprising, putting House Targaryen back in a position of strength, which they had lost during the reign of his brother Aenys. He killed his nephew Aegon the Uncrowned after he announced his claim to the throne. After the Red Keep was completed, Maegor killed all those who took part in the construction to protect the secrets of the castle. The small folk and nobility turned against him because of how brutally cruel he was. He was eventually found dead after being impaled on the Iron Throne, and he died without any children. He enjoyed torturing and killing people way too much, but he did help House Targaryen become feared again, and the Maesters were also probably at least a little bit biased against him, which is why he should be portrayed in such a negative light, or why he could be portrayed in such a negative light. But, honestly, I can't place him any higher than D tier, but he will go ahead of his brother Aenys. Next up, we have Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator. The best king. I'm already going to put him top. The best king Westeros has ever seen. He reconciled the crown with the faith of the Seven. He married his children off to powerful families to build alliances. He made just legal reforms, made a large productive investment in infrastructure, which helped increase trade in Westeros. He was married to the loved and respected good Queen Alysanne. He reigned for 55 years, the longest reign of any Westeros monarch. His reign was filled with peace, which the realm needed after the chaotic reign of his uncle Maegor. But yes, Jaehaerys II in my opinion, is the greatest king Westeros has ever seen. Now we have Viserys I. This is the same Viserys from House of the Dragon. He inherited the throne from his grandfather Jaehaerys at the height of House Targaryen's power. I really do not like Viserys. I think he was a very bad king. He inherited the throne at such a good time, such a time of peace and prosperity for House Targaryen. And then he named his daughter Rhaenyra his heir, which goes against the laws of Westeros, then got remarried and had a son, and still kept his choice of heir. Naming your daughter your heir when you have a trueborn son is only going to divide the realm and your family. The Dance of the Dragons broke out right after he died, which led to many deaths and ultimately led to the death of all the dragons. Viserys deserves most of the blame for this because of how poorly he handled his succession. He's going in D tier, but I will put him above Aenys and Maegor because the realm was mostly at peace during his reign. But he literally inherited the throne at such a good time and completely blew it by how poorly he handled his succession. Next up, we have King Aegon II. He was crowned king after his father's death despite his sister being the named heir. War broke out immediately upon his ascension. Despite almost dying at the Battle of Rook's Rest, Aegon kept fighting against his sister's faction. He eventually killed his sister and won the war before being poisoned. His reign was filled with war and instability. However, I can't put him in D since he never really got a fair chance to rule. So I'll put Aegon in C tier. And I also really admire how much he... I talk about this as if it was real, but this is all made up. But Aegon really took a lot of major blows during the Dance of the Dragons, but kept fighting, and technically won the war, although Rhaenyra's son ends up succeeding him, but that's besides the point. The war was ended when Rhaenyra died, in my opinion. So I'll put Aegon II in C tier. Next up we have King Aegon III, the Dragonbane. Out of all the Targaryen kings, Aegon III had the best reason to go mad. He grew up during the Dance of the Dragons, when his mother's faction fought against his uncle's. He watched his mother get eaten by his uncle's dragon when he was only 10 years old. Because of this, he was considered a joyless man who found pleasure in almost nothing. Despite this, he didn't go mad and was actually a decent king. He helped to restore peace and stability to Westeros, which had just been in an incredibly bloody war, by rebuilding infrastructure and restoring food supplies to famished regions. I'll put Aegon III in B tier. I think he was a solid king, especially considering his circumstances. Now next up we have Daeron I, the Young Dragon. Probably the coolest king on this list. He's considered kind of the Alexander the Great of Westeros. He ascended to the throne at the age of 14, and he sought to conquer Dorne and do what his ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, had failed to do. When his counselors objected to this plan and said he shouldn't invade because the dragons were dead, Daeron replied, "You have a dragon. He stands before you." That's probably one of the coldest lines of all time, so he gets my respect for that. And he actually succeeded in his conquest of Dorne, when the Prince of Dorne eventually bent the knee. This is very impressive considering his ancestor, who was known as the Conqueror, failed to conquer Dorne even with 3 dragons. Daeron did it with none. Despite the Dornish nobility submitting to Daeron, the small folk resisted, and he was killed at the age of 18, having only reigned for 4 years. Daeron was a solid king with a lot of ambition and potential, but since he was killed at a young age, I can't put him any higher than C tier. But I guess I'll put him ahead of Aegon. Now we have Baelor I, the Blessed. He was not fit to be king, but he wasn't completely terrible at the job. He was utterly devoted to the faith of the Seven. He never consummated his marriage nor had any children. He was able to make peace with the Prince of Dorne by walking barefoot to Sunspear, releasing the hostages his brother had captured, and agreeing that his cousin Prince Daron Targaryen would marry Princess Miriam Martell when they both come of age. He stepped into a pit of vipers to save his imprisoned cousin Aemon the Dragon Knight, rescuing him despite almost dying. He did some questionable things such as imprisoning his sisters to preserve their innocence. He tried to change messenger ravens to doves. He burned books that he believed to be corrupt. He named an 8-year-old boy High Septon because he thought he could work miracles, and he fasted himself to death. Baelor could even be considered one of the mad Targaryens due to how devoted he was to the faith, which led him to do bizarre things. But overall, his reign was peaceful, and he was loved by the small folk, so I'll put Baelor the Blessed in C tier. Where should I put him? I'll put him at the bottom of C tier for now, actually. Okay, now we have King Viserys II. Shout out Quinn the GM if you're watching this. This is like his favorite king. He served his hand for his brother Aegon III and his nephews Daron I and Baelor I. He's said to have played a huge part in maintaining stability in the realm. It's said, Daron warred and Baelor prayed, Viserys ruled. And he became the king at the age of 49, which is quite old. He issued new reforms, established a new royal mint, increased trade across the Narrow Sea, and made positive revisions to the already progressive code of laws. He suddenly died from a sickness, having only reigned for a little over a year. Some say that he was poisoned by his son Aegon IV. Since his son Aegon was so corrupt, many discredit Viserys. However, this isn't fair because his other son Aemon the Dragon Knight was one of the most honorable men in Westeros history. Viserys could have been a second Jaehaerys, but since he only reigned for 1 year, I'll have to put him in A tier, which is quite respectable. Okay, now, what a lot of you probably have all been waiting for. We have Aegon IV, the Unworthy. That is why the F tier was made. He's going in F. In my opinion, Aegon IV is the worst king Westeros has ever had. He was a glutton, he was lustful, selfish, and a fool. He fathered several bastards on numerous women. He filled the court with men who would flatter him rather than men of talent and wisdom. He gave away priceless treasures to those who pleased him, including a dragon egg. His wife despised him. His only true-born son, Prince Daron, advised him not to invade Dorne. Aegon did anyway, and his fleet was destroyed by a storm. Aegon was not fond of his son Daron, as he would often counsel him against his foolishness. He died a disgusting death, rotting on his couch due to his severe obesity. On his deathbed, he legitimized his bastards, putting them in the line of succession. This final decree led to the bloody Blackfire rebellions, which lasted 5 generations. He's going at the bottom of F tier, the worst king. Some people say that this guy right here is worse, but I'll get into that later when we go over him. Next up, Daron II, the Good. He was Aegon IV's son, which is surprising since he was nothing like his father. He had to rewrite the wrongs his father had done. Aegon had claimed Daron was the bastard son of Aemon the Dragon Knight, so Daron crowned himself with his father's crown to help get rid of those rumors. He chose new members of the Small Council who were wise and shrewd. He replaced the City Watch, whose officers had been just as corrupt as his father Aegon. He treated his recently legitimized bastards honorably, probably as a way to keep them from rebelling. He gave his half-brother Daemon Waters a wife and some land. Daron married Princess Miriam Martell. Him and his wife had a happy marriage. He negotiated a peace agreement with his brother-in-law Meryn Martell, which finally united Dorne to the Seven Kingdoms, something his predecessors had failed to do. Daron had Summerhall built to represent the new peace. Summerhall was a palace in the Dornish marshes that was occupied by House Targaryen. However, many houses hated the Dornish after years of warring against them, so they resented the privileges Daron gave to them. He overcame the first Blackfyre rebellion started by his half-brothers Daemon Blackfyre and Aegor Rivers, also known as Bittersteel. Following the first Blackfyre rebellion, Daeron took lands, castles, and hostages from the houses that supported the Blackfyres as punishment. The rest of his reign was peaceful. His oldest son and heir, Baelor Breakspear, served as Daeron's hand, and many say he would have been a great king if he hadn't died at the tourney of Ashford Meadow. Daeron reigned for a mostly peaceful and prosperous 25 years. The years that weren't peaceful were because of his father's actions, and weren't really his fault. I see no reason why Daeron the Good can't go in S tier. I'm actually going to put him ahead of Aegon the Conqueror, because he had one wife which helped forge an alliance, while Aegon had two wives who were his sisters and it created no alliances. And Daeron's original heir was much better suited for ruling than either of Aegon's sons were. Okay, now we have King Aerys II. Aerys I, rather. He was really not fit to be king at all. The second son of King Daeron probably never thought he would be king until his older brother died. But he was a bookish man who preferred reading over ruling. He never had any interest in consummating his marriage due to his obsession with books. Something he did well was naming his uncle, Brynden Rivers, also called Bloodraven, his hand, who essentially ran the kingdoms for him. The Ironborn raided different parts of Westeros during his reign. The Second Blackfyre Rebellion was ended with little bloodshed thanks to Bloodraven's spy network. The Third Blackfyre Rebellion ended when Aegor Rivers was captured, and while Aerys was counseled to put him to death, he spared Bittersteel and sentenced him to take the Black instead. This turned out to be a mistake because the ship transporting Bittersteel was intercepted and he was brought back across the Narrow Sea, where he began to plot the next Blackfyre Rebellion. He died without any children, leaving the throne to be inherited by his brother Maekar. While Aerys was not a horrible king, he also was not a great king, so I'll put him in C tier. At the bottom. Okay. Now we have Maekar I, the Anvil. He was okay. He kept his politically effective uncle Bloodraven as Hand of the King, which was smart. He had a mostly peaceful reign. He had a new crown made to look more warlike. He was the father of one of the mad Targaryens, Aerion Brightflame, which is not really good for him. And his son had died drinking wildfire because he thought it would turn him into a dragon. He was also the father of Maester Aemon from Game of Thrones. He died in the Pika Uprising, being crushed by a rock that was hurled from the battlements of Starpike. That's a pretty manly way to go out, so he gets some points for that. But he wasn't anything too special as a king, but since his reign was mostly peaceful, that's enough for me to put him in B tier. Now we have Aegon V, the Unlikely. This is actually... I made a video, my first ever video was on Aegon V, so go watch that if you haven't already, but it was about how overrated I believe he is. I think he is the most overrated king in Westeros history. His first decree was to arrest his grand-uncle Bloodraven and send him to the wall for killing Aenys Blackfyre, who had been promised safe conduct to Westeros. This was not smart, as Bloodraven was fiercely on the Targaryen side, and the more Blackfyres dead, the more peace there would be. Bloodraven also had numerous spies in his employ, which gave House Targaryen a ton of information and thus power. He gave the small folk too many privileges, which angered the nobility. He couldn't control his children as they all didn't follow through on the marriage pacts he made for them, which would have established many powerful alliances. And Aegon's obsession with hatching the dragon eggs led to the mysterious tragedy of Summerhall, where King Aegon, Prince Duncan, Sir Duncan the Tall, and others of the royal court died in a fire. He was not a very good king. He's at best C tier. I'll put him... Honestly, he was a good man. I'll put him ahead of Aerys, I guess, because he had kids at least, and at least the small folk loved him, so. But yeah, not a good king. Now we have King Jaehaerys II. My second video on this channel was about how underrated I believe Jaehaerys to be. No one really thinks much of him when they think of Targaryen kings, which kind of annoys me. He was able to get the nobility back on the crown side without angering the small folk. During the War of the Ninepenny Kings, Jaehaerys assembled the armies of the Iron Throne and attacked the Stepstones first before the Ninepenny Kings could invade, which saved many lives. The Ninepenny Kings were defeated, and the last male of House Blackfyre, Maelys the Monstrous, was killed, ending the Blackfyre rebellions also. Who knows what could have happened if Jaehaerys waited for the Ninepenny Kings to attack first. Many believe Jaehaerys to be a weak king since he was sick most of his life, but Barristan Selmy on his Kingsguard thought otherwise. I'll agree with Barristan. He died from a sickness after only reigning for 3 years. Now, some may criticize him for forcing his children, Aerys and Rhaella, to marry. This was because Jaehaerys believed in the prophecy that Azor Ahai would be born from their line. Jaehaerys played a huge part in potentially saving the world, if Azor Ahai is in fact Rhaegar, Jon Snow, or Daenerys, as many fans believe. Jaehaerys II is going in A tier, and I'll actually put him ahead of Viserys because he reigned a little bit longer. And I feel like he had a lot of potential. Okay, now we have Aerys II, the Mad King. You could probably guess that someone known as the Mad King was not a very good one. His reign actually started out decently. He named the ruthless Lord of Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister, his hand, who proved to be very effective. The early years of his reign prospered thanks to Tywin, leading many to question who was truly the one running the kingdoms. Aerys envied Tywin because of this, and it caused a rift in their once close relationship. He kept increasing in madness and paranoia over jealousy of Tywin, death of multiple of his children when they were infants, and his imprisonment during the defiance of Duskendale. He would burn anyone alive who he was suspicious of. The Targaryen dynasty was overthrown in his reign during Robert's Rebellion, where Aerys was killed by his own Kingsguard, Sir Jaime Lannister. The Targaryens were usurped by the Baratheons as the new royal dynasty. The Mad King definitely belongs in F tier, but I'm actually going to put him ahead of Aegon the Unworthy, because at least Aerys has the excuse of being mentally ill, whereas Aegon was just an idiot. And Aegon's actions also caused more bloodshed, and Aerys' reign was peaceful in the early years. Thanks for watching, guys. If you agree with my list or you disagree, please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.